Welcome to Sitcom Showdown, a podcast that reviews classic sitcom episodes and inducts them into our very own Hall of Fame. As usual, one of us has chosen a sitcom episode and the other guy has no idea what it's going to be. Will they already know it? Will they love it? Can they be convinced that it's worthy? Let's find out on Sitcom Showdown.
Welcome back to Sitcom Showdown. It's great to have you with us. I'm Steve and I've got Jeff here, and it's Jeff's turn to choose an episode for us. What have you got?
Red Dwarf.
Whoa!
But I don't feel confident about the episode of Red Dwarf I've chosen.
Okay, well, I mean, Red Dwarf, I'm quite partial to it, so...
Yeah. Okay. Well,
I think we're in the right postcode.
You'll find out what I'm talking about later on when we do that. But for those who don't know what Red Dwarf is, I'll give you a quick explanation. Red Dwarf is a British sci-fi sitcom.
Love it.
And the premise of it is that Dave Lister becomes the last human being alive, but he's trapped out in space 3 million years in the future, and he's on a Jupiter Mining Corporation ship called Red Dwarf. And he's been revived from stasis after a radiation leak where he's joined by the now loopy ship's computer, Holly. He's also joined by a cat humanoid who's evolved from Dave Lister's original cat that he smuggled on board millions of years before. And the final member is a hologram of Dave Lister's immediate superior, a pain in the backside, Arnold Rimmer. Yes. And then later on, they're joined by Krytie in Series 3, who's another star of the show, a service mechanoid. It was on BBC Two. But then, starting in 2009, it moved over to the Dave Network. So it's been going since 1988. So there's a 12th series happening this year, and they had a 10-year gap between 1999 and 2009.
Oh.
The famous stars are, and were they famous stars before they got into Red Dwarf? We'll find out. So I'll start with Chris Barry, just because he's got the greater sitcom pedigree of all the cast, being in that he was the star of British Empire for 7 series from 1991 to 1997.
Yay.
He's had his own shows, sort of Hammond and May style. You know, he's had Chris Barry's Massive Machines.
Oh.
Then he's had Massive Speed. And he's had Greatest Machines. And these are for National Geographic.
Right.
So there'll be 4 episodes of him talking about stuff.
Have you watched any of those?
Nope. But he's started out more or less as an impressionist. And he's been in episodes of Young Ones, Filthy Rich and Cat Flap and Blackadder.
What do you call it when someone's got a name that consists of 2 first names?
Oh, Frank Skinner would know.
Yes.
Oh, is that a rhetorical question that you've got an answer for?
No,
you don't know.
No, I've got no idea.
All right, so Frank.
I'm sure it's a thing.
Yeah. Okay, Craig Charles, who is Dave Lister.
He's another one.
He's another one. Oh, crikey. So Craig Charles was a performance poet and musician, and he'd done a bit of TV, you know, appearing as a funky dude who reads out poems and stuff on hip TV shows in the 80s. And then he got the Red Dwarf gig. But although he hasn't done a lot of sitcom, he was in Coronation Street for 10 years, so I read. Robot Wars host, so he's done a lot of hosting and presenting. He did Robot Wars for 6 years, and he's been a BBC radio DJ for something like over 15 years with his Funk and Soul show. Robert Llewellyn, Krytie. Yeah, well, this made his career, basically. But he also presented a brilliant show, Scrap Heap Challenge.
Yes, love Scrap Heap Challenge.
And then
kids like that one.
Oh, it's a brilliant show. He was in an episode of Bottom. He's been in the CBBC show MI High, which is about school kiddies that are in MI9 as opposed to MI6 or MI5. So it's a kiddie spy show, apparently. And he's presenter of a show called Top Trumps, which I don't know about. Danny John Jules, the cat, he's currently a cop in Death in Paradise. Now, I've seen a lot of ads for Death in Paradise. I've never watched it. Have you watched it, Steve?
No. It sounds like a murder mystery or something.
Yep, and it's set in a Caribbean country, and everyone's tipping the star of Death in Paradise, whose name escapes me, to be the new Doctor Who.
Huh.
So we'll soon find out if that's
right.
What's happening. And he was in Maid Marian with Tony Robinson.
Right.
Have you seen Maid Marian?
No, what?
And Her Merry Men?
What genre is that?
It's kiddies show.
Right.
So probably like Horrible Histories.
Yeah.
But with Baldrick starring in it. Not as Baldrick, of course. And Chloe Annette, who's also part of the team for the episode we're looking at as Kochanski, she was in Crime Traveller as the lead and inventor. And she's been in all sorts of all the usual British stuff like Holby City and Casualty and all those sorts of shows. All right, well, let's zip off and find out which one we're watching.
All right.
So what do you propose? We nail that horny stag and get you and the divine Miss K together. It's my way of saying sorry.
But nothing that's going to endanger the appeal.
First, we sabotage the date. You get to his quarters through the air vents. I've paid off the guards. Then you make him look like the nerdiest slob in the entire universe. Now this is what you leave in his quarters. A half-eaten onion sandwich. That's always a passion killer. Is it? I like those. Then there's this. Morris Dancer Monthly. What a total dweebo nerdmeister will look with those.
They're mine.
And then there's these. Tragically unfashionable underpants.
Have you been going through my things?
Alright, Steve, we're back, and we've just watched a Series 8 episode of Red Dwarf, which I think was episode 5, from 1999, called Krytie TV. And I'll just say up front that my earlier warblings about having trouble getting it through are because I've known Red Dwarf fans don't like Series 8. That's universally acknowledged, that as a group, generally speaking, they don't like it. But when I looked into that to see what proof there was that they didn't like it, you do see quotes and such, even to the point where on Wikipedia, they're saying things like it's a contender for the worst of all the series ever. And that stands for this series, and this episode is one of the two considered the worst ever.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You know, and I've speculated about reasons for this and all that. But before we go into all that, I should do a synopsis of what actually happens.
Yep.
And it's fairly fast-paced. So at this point in the Red Dwarf story, they're not on their own alone in deep space. The whole crew and everyone aboard Red Dwarf has been resurrected by nanobots. So all the people that died millions of years before in the radiation leak have all been brought back. And without a suitable explanation of how this happened, they ended up in prison, and they're now prisoners aboard a fully populated Red Dwarf. The episode starts out with images of Kryten with the women prisoners, having to do exercise with them and hang out with them, and he's painting, instead of painting toenails with Kochanski, he's painting his whole foot with nail polish. Anyway, so you cut from that brief bit to Rimmer and Lister in their cell, and the first gag is that Lister comes in and says the post's arrived, and it's a literal post, so they're doing a bit of punning. But it's got to hold his bed up because he think he gave it some structural problems with the beans. So that's the level we're at, pretty much.
That's pretty standard Red Dwarf humor. A big curry or beans or something like that.
Oh, yeah, knowing Lister, it'd have to be curry as well, yeah. So this is a whole 4-minute section before things get rolling, and it allows Rimmer and Lister to snipe at each other and do all their usual insult humour. They get some mail as well as the post, and, you know, Rimmer ends up winning a trip to Mauritius in the Reader's Digest lottery, and then ends up winning the Reader's Digest lottery. The gag, of course, being that he's 3 million years into deep space and can't claim it. So 2 letters arrive that get the plot going, and one's saying that Lister's guitar's been found in the wreckage of Starbug and is being returned to the cell. And that's fine, except even though Lister's absolutely thrilled at this, Rimmer's totally crushed because he hates Lister's guitar. And we get a good insertion gag there. So Rimmer's pretty horrified about this. But when the guitar comes in with no strings, Rimmer's really pleased. And then another letter is opened and it says that Lister's been granted an appeal hearing, and the letter says if the appeal is successful, other prisoners in his situation, i.e. Kat and Kachansky and Krytie and Rimmer, they'll also have their circumstances changed as well. So Lister and Rimmer are really pleased about this, assuming that if Dave Lister gets let off, then Rimmer and Kat and all that will also get let off, and this kicks things off. So we cut to a transporter where the Canary team are all on their way back from a mission, and Kryten's complaining about having been classified as a female prisoner because he hasn't got any male reproductive organs. And he especially hates showering with the women. And so some of the other male prisoners hear this, and they suggest to Kryten that perhaps he should film it for their benefit. And he naturally sticks to his guns and says, "No way, I can't believe you suggested that." And he stomps off to go and sit with the fellow female prisoners. So back when they get back to prison, Mr. Ackerman, who's in charge and the main disciplinarian of the Canaries, calls them all together because he's had his glass eye stolen and he wants to know who did it. And so because there's an appeal on and Rimmer wants to be a model prisoner, he dobs in the chap who stole it and gets beaten up for his trouble. And it's always nice to see Rimmer getting beaten up, so that's quite good. So that's neither here nor there, really. It just illustrates that Rimmer will do anything to get this appeal up and happening. And establishes that Mr. Ackerman's going on a date on the weekend with his lady friend, and without an eye, he's going to look a bit dodgy.
Yeah.
So we go to movie night on the male prisoners' quarters, where they're running this crappy old 1950s black and white sci-fi movie, but then it gets interrupted, and Kryten appears on the screen, and he's announcing a live pay-per-view event, which is Ladies' Shower Night. So we know somehow that they've gotten to him. And this happened when someone placed a bit of litter on the floor, knowing Kryten would bend over and pick it up, at which point they conked him over the head with a spanner and dragged him off and reprogrammed him. Anyway, goons come around with buckets for the prisoners to pay for their pay-per-view fee in whatever they can, or Kryten's going to keep staring at a cracked shower floor tile. And Kat, Rimmer and Lister are in a very difficult position here, because they shouldn't be watching it because it's their friend Kachansky involved, and they shouldn't be watching it because of the appeal. But they can't help themselves.
No, can't drag themselves away.
No. So, feeling a bit guilt-ridden afterwards, Lister visits Kryten in his quarters that he shares with Kachansky, and he's telling Kryten to have it stopped. And, meanwhile, Kryten's there in his gold suit, so to speak, and he's surrounded by all these riches and luxuries and all that, and he's obviously the new kingpin of the prison. But then Lister spills the beans and dobs him in, and Kachansky's furious about this, of course. But the jig's up, and it's a great relief to Rimmer, who is really worried about all this affecting the appeal. And Kryten gets transferred back to the male prisoners' quarters. And when he's moving all his stuff in, he's talking to Lister, and then reveals that Kachansky's now going out with her ex-boyfriend, Tim, since she's not talking to Dave. And obviously, Dave's very unhappy about this. Rimmer probably doesn't care, but either way, they hatch a plan to sabotage the date and get Lister back with Kachansky. So, to make up for being so horrible before, Krytie's helping them with this plan.
Well, he just lays out the plan.
Yeah, he totally does. And that's one of the funniest scenes in itself, but we can get to that later. So, they go ahead with the plan, and Lister's in there sabotaging it and doing all these horrible things to Ackerman's quarters so that when he gets back there with his date, he's going to look really, really terrible. But this is after sabotaging it. He steps out of the door with the job done, and Kryten springs his trap on him, saying he's been set up for Krytie TV and that he's just trashed Mr. Ackerman's quarters, and Ackerman's due back with his date at any moment. And Rimmer can't believe this while he's watching it in the movie room, and he's going, "They're a pal!"
Yeah.
And sprints out to go back and help Lister clean up the room before Ackerman gets back.
Yeah.
And we go into the big action sequence of them cleaning it all up, which they manage to do, and we draw to the end of the episode where they're back in their cell, and the mail arrives saying that the appeal has been successful, and that Lister, as a result of this successful appeal, is now allowed strings on his guitar.
Yep.
And Rimmer can't believe it because he thought the appeal was about getting them off, and it's his worst scenario. in that now Lister's going to have strings on his guitar, and Lister's so happy that he's decided he's going to write Rimmer a song to thank him for all his help. And that's the end of the episode. So after that massive synopsis, I've got more notes and ranting to do. Do you want to add anything before we move into that?
No, I think you did a good job of summing it up.
Thank you. That's very good. So we've got the aforementioned problem, not so much a problem for you and me, but of it being a not very well-regarded series and probably one of the worst-regarded episodes. I think this episode chock-a-block full of gags. It's got a high gag per minute ratio. It's just a lot of fun. There's a lot of mucking about, and it plays against type, and that's probably why I like it, because instead of Krytie fawning over Mr. Lister all the time, he's actually stabbing in the back and being very duplicitous and setting him up and doing all these things and turning on his friends to make money and become a bit of a kingpin. So it's Krytie very much acting not like himself, and Rimmer not acting too much like himself, because although he's still sinking the boot into Lister whenever possible, he's being Mr. Helpful because of the appeal. So you've got Rimmer trying to do all these things to help Lister out, and Krytie trying to work against him, which is the total opposite of what normally happens. And sadly, there's not a lot of Holly in this, and there's not a lot of Cat in this, and there's not too much Kachansky in it. So it's a bit of a three-hander, really. But yes, it's good for those reasons. That and the usual reasons why Red Dwarf is good, with all the insult humour. And why is it that Red Dwarf fans don't like it? And I did some thinking about this, and I've come to a lot of quite negative conclusions with some armchair amateur psychoanalysis.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Oh, well, it's not. I don't want to. If Red Dwarf fans are tuning into this, and hello, listener, if you are a Red Dwarf fan, but not so much a fan of other sitcoms, then apologies in advance, because Red Dwarf's a fantastic sitcom, and I can understand why people like it. But the take I'm taking on this is that a vast majority probably have no love for Series 8 because not only is it a different situation for the cast, right? Instead of being adventurers out there on their own and they're in charge, they're now locked down. They're sort of not in control of their own destiny. You know, Rimmer's not the authority now to rail against. The real ranking officers are the authority. And this comedy is sort of really broad comedy. There's lots of puns, racy jokes, slapstick, insults. And in this series, there's no life lessons to be learned. So to speak. And there's just basically not a lot of sci-fi in it. This episode features no time travel.
Yep.
It's less intellectual this season. You know, I mean, it's less about the human condition and being the last human in space. There's much fewer emotional moments. And I'm guessing, you know, some pretentious sci-fi nerds who are more sci-fi fans than sitcom fans, they like to watch sci-fi more than they prefer to sit down and watch sitcoms. They're really invested in the Red Dwarf world and have been for about a decade or more by the time this comes out. They're very invested in it, and the show's changed so much, and it's a bit too lowbrow for them possibly. There's less to believe in, and there's more to laugh at. So I'm not saying they're joyless, you know, sort of, well, maybe I am saying that, I don't know. But in this one, you know, there's a lot of testosterone flying around because they're in prison. And there's no mucking about in time and space. And so if you're a Star Trek fan, for example, right, you might identify with future worlds where everything's lovely and equal and rational and it's of the mind, you know, and smarter people are valued and technology erases physical advantages and it's, you know, you don't get mocked like in high school or whatever. But in prison, it's a completely different story. So all those things get erased. There's no rationality. There's no valuing of the mind. It's just who's the biggest, toughest bastard in jail. And how's all that going to work? So maybe that's why it doesn't sit too well with a bunch of people. That's my theory. I mean, a lot of Red Dwarf fans didn't like it at all when Kachansky came on board because it sort of split up their little team of... So, I don't know. Maybe they're just being too precious about it. I'm not entirely sure. So, what are your thoughts on all of that rambling?
Well, I can relate to the bit about the sci-fi, not being there and missing that. Definitely, I think that, well, it's one of the interesting things about Red Dwarf is the story can go off in all sorts of interesting directions, but this is just like really grounded. And, so I do miss that. So maybe I do agree with the people.
Well, you're definitely not alone.
It seemed like they were in jail, but not in jail at the same time.
Yes.
Like, there's this scene where Kachansky comes in to a room where Dave is and they have a 5-minute conversation, and that was probably explained, but...
Well, two things. I think it's part of their canary privileges, because if you go on the death missions as a canary, you get special privileges.
Yeah.
So that partially explains it.
So you can fraternise with the
I
inmates
guess so.
of the opposite sex.
Yeah. And also Krytie probably bribed it so that Dave could come over and visit, because, you know, he owns all the guards now because he's Krytie and he's running things. So, yes, but this can come into a little section I like to call plot holes you can drive a Starbug through.
All right, I might be able to add a few to your list.
Okay, cool. What have you got?
Well, the letter's about... okay, take me back. So there's this scene where Rimmer and Lister are getting the mail.
Yep.
The post. And they simultaneously get the 2 letters. The one about...
Your guitar's been found and it's going to be delivered.
Then the one about the appeal.
Yes.
And I was thinking to myself, how could he have lodged an appeal against the guitar strings not being there if the guitar had only just arrived?
You've nailed the number one plot hole that you can drive a Starbug through. Right, now the only possible explanation for that is that having found Lister's guitar, his mate Peterson on the outside, knowing that he won't be allowed strings, lodged the appeal for him, knowing that Lister would want some strings. Now, that's pretty unlikely.
I'm just getting warmed up.
Yep. How do women shower for 3 hours? So they watch the showering for 3 hours.
Yeah, I've got nothing.
Yeah. Well, we don't have to solve
Especially
these.
in prison.
Yeah, especially in prison. Water rations and all that.
Yeah, you're doing hard labour in prison and go and have a shower for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Maybe they had a foot massage or
Something like that.
had their
Who
nails
knows?
done after that.
So there's a few plot holes in this episode. But, you know, they all serve to get things going. And see, then, even that is looking at it from a sci-fi fan's viewpoint. If you're a sci-fi fan, you like to pick plot holes in stuff like endless arguing about Doctor Who or Star Trek or whatever, saying, oh, they couldn't have done this because of that, and they couldn't have done that because of this. Whereas, you know, if you sit down for a standard episode of a half-hour brain-free sitcom, you're less worried about plot holes. So you can see why they've done it. But it doesn't detract from my enjoyment of the episode one iota.
Keep going.
Keep going. All right, well, that's all I've got as far as plot holes go and all that sort of stuff. But it's just, I love the description of the sabotage plan. And it's a classic Dad's Army thing to do a setup of a plan before you carry out the plan.
Yep.
Which allows you to double up on the humour. And I love the reveal at the end, the all-important appeal was about guitar strings, and Rimmer's tearing his hair out, but Lister's so sincere and so thankful and genuine in his thanks to Rimmer for helping him out, and then he's going to write him a song. So it's got all the usual Red Dwarf humour bits, which I think is fantastically excellent. It's got really good pace, nifty plot twists, and there's lots of jokes of different kinds. So, yeah, I like all that. And I find this is a good example of a sitcom and not so much a good example of sci-fi, but I don't necessarily watch it for the sci-fi. I enjoy all Red Dwarf, but I enjoyed this more than usual Series 8.
Well, should we run through some of my notes?
Yeah, please do.
I liked the Lister and Rimmer relationship in this one because even though they're having a go at each other a bit in that opening scene, they do work really well together, and it's interesting watching them, like Rimmer going in to help Lister out. That was really good.
They're getting along. They're at a comfortable place.
Yep. Did like the evil Krytie, and then there were some good gags in there, but I don't know.
You're having a hard time with the plot holes,
I was struggling a bit,
or just the level of humour?
Well, I was missing the sci-fi stuff. I just didn't find it as funny as I would normally find Red Dwarf.
Right.
It's not to say there aren't good gags in there.
Yeah.
The plot holes had me scratching my head.
So you've got to do it, Steve.
I've got to do what?
Yeah, well, no, if you don't think it's the best example of Red Dwarf.
It wouldn't be one of the ones that springs to mind for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's plenty more Red Dwarf where that came from. So give us the official verdict.
The official verdict?
Yeah.
Oh, banned.
Yeah. Right,
Rejected. Oh, I feel really bad.
You sound like me.
Well, I'd love to see Red Dwarf get in.
So hence why I started out the way I did, which is being, right, this one does not have a good reputation. But it's the one I enjoy the most.
Yeah.
as it turns out. But yeah, Red Dwarf's like more or less a slam dunk.
I wish I could get behind it, but I can't.
No, that's what it's all about. So there's one attempt, and it's been swatted back, and I don't know, we've got plenty more attempts ahead of us.
Yep.
The worst episode of Red Dwarf, according to many but not me, has not made it into the Sitcom Showdown Hall of Fame. But Red Dwarf will ride again.
Yes.
And I hope you'll join us next time on Sitcom Showdown, where it's going to be Steve's selection.
Yep. See you, everyone.
Bye! Join us next time on Sitcom Showdown, when we'll be putting another 5-star episode under the microscope. And in the meantime, you can contact us with feedback on Facebook, Twitter @Sitcom Showdown, or by email sitcomshowdown@gmail.com.